I'm not going to be one of those people who cries about it online. I'll talk a little smack, but I'm just going to pivot and go dance over here. You don't want to hear my idea for your soundbite or your jingle?
Oh, sure. I mean, you got something, bring it. Yes,
Right. It's a toss-up between nana 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 BlatzChatz. I like that's my number one. My number two is Jay Blatz got her own podcast. Blatz. You like that? Which one? Which one of those do you want? I mean, they're both my IP, but I'm giving them to you. You can have them both to use, but whichever one you want, I'll help you work on it.
That's a tough one. I guess I kind of like the first one because I'm
Yeah.
familiar with the Batman jingle. So that's why it resonates with me a little bit.
All right.
I love it. That's fun.
All right.
I might have to take you up on that.
I'll sing it. I'll harmonize too. Like I'll do it like Destiny's Child. I'll do it like in a girl voice. It'll be way better that way. Or maybe it's better if it's a dude voice trying to sing like that.
Maybe.
Right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, that is great. So, Thomas, what is something a lot of people don't know about you?
I don't know. A couple of people online know that I'm also a songwriter. I don't devote the same amount of time to that as I used to, but I actually have 11 records online and I have a 12th that's just kind of in limbo right now because I just don't have time to work on it. So, south of Dallas, there's a little town that I was on stage at age 4 singing country songs and gospel songs to 1,000 people. We have a house on the lake about, I don't know, about an hour southwest. And so this would have been in Ennis, Texas. So Ennis is right. Do you know where that is? It's south of Dallas.
I think so.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I was on stage there at age 4. And by like age 10, my teachers started entering me into drawing contests and I was getting good at illustration and drawing and painting and things like that. And I started to write poems, and the poems were very corny. I mean, I still have them. I would be embarrassed to probably share. I could find a couple, but
I think you need to find a couple. I
okay,
need to
when you
see these
post this,
poems.
I promise I'll
Okay.
post one. But I won a poetry contest and got published in Highlights magazine as a child. Before I was even 10 or 11 years old, I was already musically inclined, artistically inclined, and my writing was coming together. And so by the time I was a teenager, I was writing rock operas and in bands. Like everyone else was wanting to play covers in bands, and I was wanting to write a record, and people thought I was crazy for being 16 17 years old and wanting to write a record. By the time I needed to go to college and get away from where I grew up and sort of grow and try to leverage my whatever it was, that those artistic abilities to somehow get a paycheck, because I grew up poor. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. A lot of people who grew up very poor, they grew up resenting poverty and they grew up
Yeah.
like angry at it. Like, I don't
Yeah.
ever want to eat ramen or like have to steal to eat again. I don't want to live like that. I don't want to sleep outside. So the thing is you get sucked into this kind of neoliberalism thing of obtaining things and just saying, well, okay, well, at least I'm not poor. And so I kind of got stuck in that for many years. That's how I got started. And that's kind of how those are all things that people don't really know much about me.
Yeah. So how did that backstory and those talents kind of you into like user experience, customer experience, service
Right.
design?
Early 90s, I went to school, and back then the degree was called commercial art. And so my college got bought out by Art Institute. My first school that I went to got bought out by the Art Institutes, and they changed the degree. So there was no longer that degree. So I basically just changed it to visual design, which is the new degree. When I started that, it was still very much old school. Computers were coming in, but they were new, and it was old school, paste up and airbrush and photography classes and doing rub down text and things like that. And then we started getting computers like right in the middle of while I was going to school. And so that's when you started learning like things like Quark Express and Photoshop and things like that. But I also was taking animation courses because I wanted to be an animator, because like I said, I was an illustrator beforehand. And so I really wanted to be an animator, and I started getting good at animation. And this is a kind of a funny story too that no one knows, is the girl I was dating at the time, her boss, his brother worked at Disney, and he worked on all of the most famous Disney movies. And he said, "Hey, I'll get you my brother's number and you can just talk to him and see what's up." And I was just like, wow. No one else in my field was working except for me and two or three other of my friends that I went to college with. And basically, I talked to him, I sent him my stuff because at the time I was working at a department store and I was working in the pre-press and working on computers and doing those ads and all that kind of stuff, the stuff that you get stuffed in your newspaper. But I was also getting to work on TV spots and stuff because I could write. And so I had a good job, and that awesome job that no one else had was making a whopping $15 an hour. This was when like the minimum wage was like $4. I sent the guy my stuff. So I took pictures of all my stuff. I got these kick-ass scans, like nobody had access to any of this stuff. And I sent it to him and he goes, "Man, if you want a job, I can give you a job as soon as you graduate." So I was like crapping in my pants that it was a possibility that I could go work for Disney. And I had these like two or three conversations with him. And on the third conversation, like a genius, because I was like 21 years old, I was a kid. I think my girlfriend might have even prompted me to do this. She was like, did you ask how much they're paying?" And I was like, "No, I was just so hung up on it being Disney."
Right.
And I was like, "That's a really smart question, honey. I think I'm going to do that." And so I called the guy and I was like, "Okay, well, what do the hours look like? And what does this pay look like if I come up there and I take this position you're talking about?" He's like, "Yeah, it's like 22 or $25,000 a year and you'll be working 65 to 70 hours a week." And I was like, "Yeah, I think I'm gonna pass on that." Because at the time I was getting paid for hour and time and a half, and I was doing catalog stuff and I was working in my field. I wasn't doing what I wanted to, but I wanted the money. And so I'm not gonna lie about it. That's how I got into that. So I left where I was going to school at in Miami, came back to Houston and started doing a lot of like oil and gas, petrochemical. It was a far cry from doing like retail and fashion. And that's when I started to do more like human machine interaction type work. And I started to get like a lot of gadgets and machinery and industrial design. And I started to design for that stuff because I had already been doing web buttons, your standard web buttons. And from 95 to about 98, most websites were just like online billboards or what, it was
Brochures.
a company's brochure, you know what I mean? When things started to take off was like, 99, 2000, 2001. And that's when things started to happen on the internet and people started selling things. That's when the Googles and the Amazons and all those started to blow up really. And so I got a lot of really good experience doing that stuff, and I got some accolades and I got some rewards, and I started to make good money. And what I realized is I really wasn't that interested in some of the stuff that my friends were doing, which is like mostly, visual design. I loved it. I made my own fonts. I did a lot of stuff that's very designery, nerdy, but I just was drifting away from that, and I was more into the technical aspect and the scientific acumen. I really wanted to design more from metrics and data, and I wanted to understand why people did the things that they did because I didn't have a heavy psychology background at that point. I really wanted to dig more into that, and doing that for healthcare and starting to do that for really large healthcare systems and doing intranets and designing stuff like that. This is a weird little segue, but let's take it for a second. So I was online and I don't know, maybe a week or so ago, and I think it was a Joe Natoli post. And we were all talking about, just kind of old school and like things that were in the 90s. I started to think about it because back then, from the 90s to let's just say the early to mid 2000s, like 2005, 2006, well, designing was so much easier because there were so fewer tools. Like Photoshop was the image editing standard.
Yeah.
For a very short time window, the vector and independent resolution tool was either freehand or Illustrator, and it
Right.
all went to Illustrator, of course,
Right.
because Adobe bought out freehand. But
Right.
it was either Quark, and then Quark went away, and it was InDesign.
PageMaker. Remember
Yeah, I
PageMaker?
do remember PageMaker. There wasn't this overwhelming, dense tool stack that people use now. You see some of these straight up production UI designers, and they're like, "Yeah, I take my thing into Figma, then it goes into Framer, and then I take it into Webflow, and then I do the flux capacitor." And you're just like, "Dude, what are you doing? Like, do you really need all of those tools to design a landing page?" And so it was so much easier tool wise, and it was so much easier to FTP into other servers and to work co-located. I was doing this remote stuff in the 90s. I look at it now and I look at how we do things, and I'm like, there's all of these tools, there's all of these frameworks. It's the exact opposite. Sometimes when you're a contractor, you're bouncing in and out of Google frameworks, Microsoft environments, and none of it plays well together. Apple, and if you're on an Apple, if you're on a Mac and you're in a Microsoft environment, oh, that's like hell. That is like don't do that. It's hell
That's
when
my
you,
life every day.
yeah, and it makes you sign in. You do all this multi-factor authentication that the PC people don't have to do. I was thinking about like on that thread and thinking about guys like like Tony Moore and John Griffin, some of the old timers that I'm connected to. Man, back then we had to know the difference between a JPEG, a PNG, a TIFF, a
Yep.
bitmap versus a vector. We had to know all that stuff, and you had to know the difference between DPI, LPI, LP, and PPI. We had to know
Yes.
what each one of those image setters versus an image versus, like sending your stuff to print versus like a billboard from a trade show booth, from a brochure to a website. You had to know all of the different resolutions, and you had to know
Oh
how
yeah.
to adjust your images, because skin tones, white people can come out looking orange and red, and black people can come out looking very dark. If you don't know how to color correct and do that stuff, and you don't know about density and
Yeah.
stuff for like different types of print models. And I thought, no one does any of that stuff anymore, and they don't even know about that stuff unless you're like at a printing press, and those guys don't make a lot of money. The information that we all had to know in order to just build websites and design decent things was a lot of information, and now it's just like you just need to know how to play around in Figma. I'm being a little bit probably condescending, just slightly, but not much. Just know they have to be masters of Figma, and you're off to the races making 200K a year.
Well, and that's an interesting point. The knowledge shift you were talking, ooh, you were dragging me through my past because
Right.
I come from a journalism graphics background where I was definitely a print designer. And I know when you say DPI 300 or if somebody
Yeah.
would send
Yeah.
you a logo
Right.
in a Word document, how that crushes your soul. So the knowledge was more about the formats and the fonts and the fundamentals of graphic design and output, the different resolutions where now resolutions are not the factor so much, and maybe it's more about the technology and the tools. Maybe
You
the
just
knowledge has shifted.
you just download your photos off of Shutterstock or off of Adobe. Like you don't have to know anything about photography. I used to take pictures of bulldozers and then go do the clipping path around them and then put them in the brochure. And now you just download a bulldozer and you click the
Right.
magic wand and it outlines it for you. And you're like, wow, this is great. But
Absolutely. Or you upload it to a website and it just swipes the background out for you. It's a whole different skill set for sure. I know exactly what you're talking about, taking that pen tool and tracing around in Photoshop and meticulously going around hair and
clipping
fine
paths,
leaves. Yes, absolutely. And
yeah,
now that's a bit of a thing of the past. So has the knowledge shifted to other things? Things
right.
that we
And
used
you,
to have to do are now kind of automated or simplified, where now the knowledge is on something else.
right. But I feel like some of the fundamentals and those steps that happen when I started out, and when like, so, maybe you started out on the ground floor doing production work and doing grunt work. And I mean, let's just not split hairs and just use the words that fit best. We're doing grunt work. You were a production worker, and there was somebody above you and somebody above that person, and you answered to that person, and you did grueling hours and you did some of that stuff, but you learned. There's that learning, that mentor mentee relationship, that stepped and kind of cadenced learning. I feel like that's kind of been lost. You mentioned something a second ago about your journalism background, which segues nicely into why I want to focus on EX and CX, organizational design and service design, and lots of discovery. The reason why I want to do all of that work is because I feel like a lot of the traditional UX stuff kind of went by the wayside, and it got sucked up into UI and product design. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not going to be one of those people who cries about it online. I'll talk a little smack, but I'm just going to pivot and go dance over here, because no matter what, I'm going to pay my bills, and I'm going to do the kind of projects I want to do, and I'm going to solve the kind of problems I want to solve, and I'm going to garner a paycheck from it. And it doesn't really matter, if I'm rich or not. I want to be happy, of course, like most people. I'm not willing to work for a whole lot of companies. The list of places I won't work is a lot longer now than it was when I was 25 or 30. The thing I wanted to mention to you about your journalism background is everybody's got a different opinion, but the reason why I'm starting to shift and pivot, and I've pivoted several times in my career, is I've determined from doing hundreds of websites, hundreds of apps, and having, a lot of trial and error and mistakes and, learning failures, that the largest issue that occurs in large organizations and enterprises, it isn't your code, and it isn't your buttons or your design systems. Yeah, those are issues and they need to be solved for. The biggest issue that I have seen, and the reason why most call centers blow up all of the time and are overburdened, is content. Content is the biggest sorest spot. And now content managers, if they exist anymore, because they're getting rid of those people too, right? When you get something mailed to you, and you get something in your inbox, in your email, you get something texted, or you go online to read on one of 100 websites in a giant organization or an app, and all of the things describing a specific product or service are different. They're in a different language. Some are first person conversational. Some sound like they're old English. Heretofore we shall, and you're like, who wrote this? Like King Dingaling? Like it just sounds like it's from the, like the Dark Ages, or it's robot talk, and it's not enough contractions. You read that stuff and you understand that, like, a lot of people over a certain age, but a lot of people who are like seniors and like our parents and older, they're just going to call in. They're going to go, you know what? I'm just going to pick up the phone. This doesn't make any sense. And what's really going on is it's a content issue. That information architecture woes and microcopy woes, all of that is being left to content designers. And a lot of content designers just in the last 2 or 3 years got laid off, and they're like, what do I do? So now they're going into conversational design. They're trying to pivot, which is smart, but that's the reason why I'm excited about just staying in my lane, because I've done a lot of employee experience stuff, and I've done service design, and I love customer experience work and putting customers first and humans first. So I'm gonna go do that.
So let me dig a little deeper into that content problem. Is the
Okay.
problem the inconsistency across the channels or
Right.
something else?
You have each LOB might have its own designer or its own writer.
Yes.
And writers, if you're a journalism major, you know exactly what I'm about to say. There's a lot of different kind of writers.
Yeah.
There's
Oh, yeah.
people who are great at micro copy, short copy, long copy, people who understand journalism, people who understand Marcom ad speak, people who are AP style or a Chicago manual of style, or they understand the looseness and the chaos of like ad copy, and especially H1s. Trust me when I tell you, 9 times out of 10, when they hire someone who has a writing resume, they're people that just, wrote in high school or college, but they don't know anything about the zing and the zip of the advertising marketing, kind of like writing great taglines or keeping all of your navigation copy, one word or 2 words or all verbs or all nouns. Like they mix
Yes.
that stuff up. And as soon as I see that stuff, I'm like, okay, I don't know what kind of writer you are, but you're not a writer of digital copy of websites or micro copy,
Yeah.
right?
And to your point, it could be different departments, different lines of business, right? Have different writers, or the product owner is just writing, or they may not have a designated writer at all.
Right,
And so you start to see those differences
right,
across those
right.
different products or touch points, right?
And that's all complexity. That's all cognitive load. You're stumping the user unintentionally. And so because that is, to me, the biggest problem that I see as far as digital is concerned most of the time. Well, now it's the lack of UX, those traditional UX skills. Those are the two biggest things that I see. I feel like those are important issues, but now that I know that, and now that I've used the law of first principles and I can't deduce it anymore, that's the problem most of
Yeah.
the time. I feel like a much larger problem is organizational design structures, who we are as a business, what kind of culture we're creating, because all problems that exist in the world are design problems, right? All of them are some form of design problem. Design itself is a cultural problem within organizations. And so understanding that culture, understanding power and influence and how power moves around. Power is never born and it never dies. It just transfers. It's energy. Understanding how that power works so that you can kind of surf it and navigate it and harness it is really important. And being able to map and understand stakeholders and understand what's driving them with regards to like incentives and compensation and things like that. Because one of the big things that's happening, and product is having a huge come to Jesus like right now too. Like for designers and researchers, it was the last 3 years. Right now, if you follow a lot of product people online, they're backpedaling, they're trying to figure out, like they're denouncing things that they were 100% proselytizing and pushing 2 years ago or a year ago. And a lot of people are starting to be apologists and saying things and writing things that lead me to believe that they're starting to understand that a lot of this stuff we bit off on and we're sold is a bunch of bunk.
Do you have an example of something
Yeah,
that?
of course. Like most of the product first stuff, this notion that first of all, design and engineers need a mediary who's really secretly their job foreman in the form of a PM, and that
Yeah.
PM needs to be all knowing and all seeing and all powerful, and that all they need is more empowerment, which is a Marty Kagan thing, and all they need is more power, and they need to be like a little mini CEO. This is all garbage. It doesn't work. It's junk, and we've been on that Kool-Aid since Eric Rice tried to tell everybody in the world we need to function like startups. And it just doesn't work. And it's okay to say it because it's true. We need to move on and we need to shift gears. And that's why I'm hopeful and I'm a little bit different than some of my contemporaries. I believe we're in a state of flux. I believe we're in a state of transition. We have not landed here. Okay. So stop panicking. What's the British thing? Be calm and shut the
Carry
F
on.
Be calm and chillax. That's like something that my son would have said. But you just need to realize that we're in a state of transition and don't freak out because there's no way we're staying here, and businesses are not dumb. And eventually C-suite is going to go, hey man, you blamed research for taking too long and you blamed designers for dragging their feet, but now we did what you wanted and everything is matrixed and everything is flat and it still isn't working. In fact, we think it's worse. And that's the truth. The truth is, after implementing all of these goofy product ideas, there has never been a worse time in history. Cory Doctorow came up with the term enshittification for a reason. It's because it's apropos for right now. Okay.
Tell me about that term.
It wouldn't have been a good term 20 years ago. It's great right now. And it's great right now because the thing is, all of these guys, when you listen to their words, they're all knocking off and borrowing from Deming. W. Edwards Deming, the dude who went over to Toyota and taught them all about, lean and manufacturing. But if you go read all of the 14 tenets or 14 rules of whatever it is, I'm going to wrap it up in a second, but they're all about like breaking down silos. They're all about continuous improvement. They're all about iteration, about breaking down barriers, getting rid of goofy metrics for metrics' sake. That was one of his big things was, hey, if you incentivize certain stats, people are going to juke the stats, meaning they're going to fake things until they get that number so they get the reward. That's how humans are. The whole gist of it was about quality. It was about creating quality. And none of these people, none of them are talking about quality. And the reason is they can't, because what they're doing is they replace quality with speed, scale, velocity. They're using all these words that just mean we need to grow. What are you growing? A turd? You're growing a terrible, unusable piece of junk into a giant, unusable piece of junk. You're growing this small thing that's harming the consumer or harming your users or doing them wrong in some kind of way. And you've got all these black hat, dark pattern things happening. And so what are you really scaling? You're going from a little Death Star to a big one. And so I think that's where we all need to come full circle back to quality. Like, hey, let's make something that's of high quality. And the way that you make something of high quality is you empower designers and researchers. You empower them to do their job. Because what I hear when I listen to all these product folks talking is they're borrowing our language and they're selling it to technicals. They're, when they start saying, Oh, we need to do continuous discovery. Thanks. You didn't invent that term. We've been talking about that for 30 years. Okay. In fact, I just told you how Deming was doing it 50 years ago. This idea that, oh, we need to talk to customers. Are you kidding? We need to do more ethnography. And they're selling this as if it's some newfangled idea. And all these product people and these technicals and these MBAs and these bean counters are drinking it up. They're like, oh my God, this is excellent. And they're regurgitating and repeating each other. And they're all clicking on this stuff. And I'm just sitting back and yawning and going, you got to be kidding me.
Yeah, everything old is new again,
It's
right?
new again. And they're renaming it. They're just renaming this stuff and selling it to them. And that's how you know it's BS, is because it's starting to take on like a toxic, boring religion. And I just think that that whole product first stuff, it's had its time. It's time to put it to bed. It's gross. It doesn't
Yeah.
work.
So talking about some of those Deming principles, right? Why do you think we've lost sight of those? Especially you talked about metrics. Woo, there's definitely some metrics for metrics' sake.
Oh yeah.
Why? Let's talk about quality specifically. Why do you think the shift of focus is away from quality and all these other factors?
Well, this part's going to sting for some people. What I've kind of come to the conclusion is there's a bunch of people online who fall into this category. They are 100% not employable by any organization. They would never be hired. They are pretty much retired. If you look at who they are, the last time they were in the game was 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Some of them have never even been inside of a large organization as a change maker like you or I. They've never seen the effects of the goofy things that they're saying. And they've never endured the disrespect and these environments of low psychological safety and very low intellectual honesty, right? So you're promoting all of these people. What you did is you told the world that all they needed was 1/3 of the three-legged stool in the form of design, and that's the only design you need. You don't need a researcher. You just need a production monkey. You need someone to go into Figma and create buttons for you at your behest and design what you want them to design. Okay, because you said that that's what you wanted, all of a sudden all these boot camps rose up to meet that need. In the last 10 years, they just blew up. And the reason why they blew up is you told the business what they wanted to hear, not what was right or true or best for the customer or user. You told them what they wanted to hear, which was design is wacky, research takes too long. Screw all these researchers who think they need 3-6 months to do some discovery. But we just need to build stuff and test it on people. We're gonna go live with it. We're gonna push it live, and we're just gonna test it out in the wild. Yeah, yeah. Was that Bill O'Reilly that had that
Yeah,
video?
fuck it. Let's do it live.
That's exactly what business and PMs have become. They've become goofy ass Bill O'Reilly. It's just ridiculous. And the thing is that right there has been a huge problem. My wife and I just watched this show. It's a few years old, but it was called, I think, Dark Water or something like that with Mark Ruffalo. And it's about the Teflon scam. It was about how DuPont was making Teflon and they were just belching the filth into the water, into the local water table. They paid this old guy because he had a giant farm up there. So they just dug up all this toxic waste from making Teflon and they buried it on his property. And it killed him. It killed him and his wife. It killed all these animals. And it was just amazing. It's a true story. You should watch it. It's amazing. But never before in history have we had this many and this level of harm that seems to just be like the Purdue and the McKinsey thing with the OxyContin and all of these types of things. 800 cars, 900 cars blown up and caught fire. Like if that were anything else at any other time, you'd have watchdog groups come in. Somebody would stop that stuff, but it isn't being stopped because what we're telling everyone is it's okay to put profit over people's lives. And
Sounds like it's a little bit of gaslighting.
there's a lot of that. There's a whole lot of that going on. And if you stand up and if you stand in the gap between a business doing harm and the customer user, you are going to be labeled a rabble rouser. You're going to be labeled, someone who's a problem, and you're going to be on your way out, especially when there's multiple rounds of layoffs. This is when they cull all the potential whistleblowers with the good boys and girls. They're like, okay, we got a Boy Scout over here on team X. We need to get rid of this guy. He's talking about people's feelings and doing right by them and stuff. I don't know what all this empathy shit is, but we need to get rid of it post haste because it doesn't sound like profit.
Yeah, yeah, that is true. So I wonder if you're alluding to the idea of everyone is a designer.
Yeah, of course. Everyone's a designer and everyone's a researcher.
What
And
do you think about that?
democratization and decentralization, they're both part of the same problem. I think again, the people who sold that to everyone are unemployable, they're retired, they sell books and templates and workshops and get speaking engagements, and they want to stay in the game. What they're doing to do that is they're telling businesses, and they're telling more than businesses, they're telling chief product officers and chief technical officers what they want to hear. They're playing 100% into their already ardent biases against research and creativity. They're telling people things like, to say that you're creative or that you have a craft or a practice is a bad word. None of those things are bad. They're saying it's ridiculous, and they're actually making fun and being disrespectful to researchers and designers. And they're saying, why do you treat design as if it's part of your identity? No one else does. It's because it is, and most other jobs aren't. You want to know why I'm saying that? Because to be a designer, to be a writer, like you were talking about, to design these things and create things and bring things into the world, you had to have learned a formula of failing and garnering wisdom from that failure a whole lot as a child. Your DNA matters. So what you garnered, what you took away from your mom and dad at birth, and your early childhood development, all of that dictates what you're going to do and how you're going to do things later in life. And things like applied mathematics, applied science, and many of the other tools and trades are learned from mimicry and memorization. That's a fact. I didn't invent that. That's not my idea. That's science. But a lot of what designers and creatives do, and rock stars and musicians and painters and poets, it is 100% our DNA and our early childhood development. And the greatest writers, the greatest designers, the greatest everything, musicians, painters, poets, all of them had some kind of traumatic childhood, or most of them did. And most of them also were neurodivergent. That's a fact too. They had some form of autism, ADHD. And so what we're really doing underneath all of that is we're really a bunch of neuro bigots in business right now. That's what's happening. Is you're like, oh, these guys are wacky. Yeah, they're too creative. And the way that they do it is kind of like what they did in Nazi Germany and a lot of other places, is they're like, show me how there's metrics to support what you're talking about. And that's the trope, and that's the trap right there. And the thing is, so much of what we do is phenomenon, and you can't tell them that. You can't say, that there are plenty of things that are like cognitive biases or logical fallacies. We don't understand why these things happen. This is why we introduced the notion of system one and system two thinking, is this idea that we can catch them and we can prevent from being biased. And the thing is no, you can't. Those things are deep seated and they're in your subconscious. It's great that we can identify them, but most people, I don't care what your level of critical thinking or your IQ is, they can't decipher on the front end before they do something that's biased, right?
Right.
So that's one of the things that I find, interesting, is they think everything has to have a measurable metric so that they can manage it. If you were to explain to them, there's hundreds of things you can explain in the way of phenomenon. One of my favorite ones is mass psychogenic illness. How do you explain that? How do you explain the phenomenon of like groupthink and like people going crazy? A soccer game sets off. Everybody loves football in European countries. Your favorite team wins. All of a sudden, they're burning down the city and destroying cop cars and killing each other. And you're like, dude, aren't you happy? You just won. Manchester United just won. Why are you burning down London? People are just easily pliable, and they have like really simple minds, and you can't explain that. You can't explain what happened at the Salem witch trials. You can't explain like people all reporting seeing certain things that, you're like, come on, you don't have a picture of that, and you're saying, something was flying around and you saw it. And so you can't explain that kind of stuff unless you explain it away and refer to it as, mental illness or people lying. But they're not lying. They believe what they're saying. And
Yeah.
so if they believe what they're saying, I think we need to investigate that more. You need to investigate things like and really understand how you or I could walk through a parking lot, see a guy with a hoodie on, and describe it to an illustrator who sits down and draws their face out and draws the exact face of the Zodiac killer. What was the one in the 80s and the Night Stalker? Ramirez. If you go look at the sketch artist did of him, it's
Hmm.
crazy close. Like it's identical to him. How do you explain that? What's the metric around me talking to you and you pulling a pad out and you drawing someone that you've never seen before and I only saw for 30 seconds?
Yeah.
How do you explain it? You can't. And there's a million things like that that we do all day, every day. And what you don't want to say ever in front of a linear thinking adapter is you never want to say, you know what? The difference between a company that works and one that doesn't is good taste. And some people have it and some people don't. You never want to say that because then they'll throw their hands up in the air and go, oh, what are you talking about? It's got to be learnable. This is what Teresa Torres and all these guys are selling. They're selling that everything is teachable, and it isn't. The very best researchers I've ever met weren't necessarily PhDs. Some of them were just kick-ass journalists or philosophers, or they were great at marketing, and they just sort of kept gravitating towards it because they loved it and they were good at it and they were inquisitive and they knew how to ask great questions and they loved people enough to be present with them and to active listen and nod their head. And especially in my field, I'm in healthcare, man. I have been on calls with people who are dying, and I've actually talked to people who later died. And I've
Yeah.
talked to people about their significant others or their family members who lost their life. I've done a bunch of stuff for legal cases for like Johnson and Johnson and Monsanto. And you're talking to people who are in wheelchairs and they've got oxygen and their hair's falling out. You have to be able to speak to people on a certain human level. And the dude who writes your C++ or your jQuery and JavaScript isn't the guy to do that.
Right. That makes sense. We covered a lot of different stuff. Phew, we could spend hours unpacking a lot of this stuff.
It's
But I
incendiary. I'm gonna get in trouble. You're gonna get a lot of you're gonna get a lot of clicks and I'm gonna get a lot of hate.
well, as it goes, right? As it goes. It wouldn't be the first time you got a little bit of hate, would it?
Nope. You know what's so funny is I saw that you did a presentation on personas recently, and I
Hmm.
was remembering back to like 2 years ago around Christmas, and a certain pretend design leader who will go unnamed was on your thread saying that there was only one type of persona and Alan Cooper invented it, and I basically dunked on him and it made him mad and he blocked me. I was wondering how your persona presentation went too. I know that's me asking you a question, but
No, no, I certainly do have a hot take on personas. I do value the research that goes into learning about your users, but I find that the final deliverable or the output of that research is often ignored or
right,
this is nice, this looks great, and filed away. For the amount of work that goes into creating an output like that, it just doesn't produce results as far as I'm concerned. And I find that they're often too high level or generic for
right,
designers to make design decisions. It's like,
right,
yeah, I mean, I'm not even talking about marketing personas that have demographics or
right.
anything. So I'm not even talking about that. Those are trash. I'm not even talking
Yeah,
about that.
yeah,
But I'm talking about UX personas. A lot of times the goals and the motivations are very difficult to translate into interaction patterns and concrete design decisions. And so that's why I think it's stronger to focus on a scenario like Indy Young talks about, a person doing a thing. This is what they're trying to accomplish. Let's
right,
focus on just that. And what are their pain points around just that, doing that thing? Why are they doing that thing? What are the tasks around doing that thing? That's the level that we can make design decisions around.
right. And to your point, I love that you called part of this out, is you were basically, saying that those marketing, branding, and positioning, we call them buyer personas, right? Marketing,
Right.
branding, and positioning and language kind of personas, they're often used in product. And that's when they fail and people talk smack about them. What was it, 2,500 years ago? Hippocrates said that there's like four different types of types. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like there's the sanguine, the caloric, the melancholic, and the phlegmatic, I
Right.
believe. From there, we went to Carl Jung. Carl Jung believed in 12 personality types and archetypes. And then you have those Myers-Briggs and the ESCI and the big five personality traits. And you have all of these things, the DISC assessment. There's a bunch of these things, right? And so by the time we get to today, and what was happening on that thread, in your thread, is that person was saying Alan Cooper invented the persona. And the funny thing is, not only did Alan Cooper not invent the persona, and there's evidence of them on the walls in the pyramids. And I just told you about, 2,500 years ago, they were like trying to type and segment humans and behave based on their behaviors. There's articles all over the place of Alan Cooper in his own words saying, I don't own the persona. I didn't invent it. Leave me alone about it. He doesn't want to talk about it anymore. And he doesn't want to talk about it anymore because his version of the persona just wasn't very good. And back to your point, they're much better if you do them in a specific scenario, a specific context or use case, and then those become archetypes. And yeah, they're a form of persona, but most people don't know the differences, and they don't know that there are those archetypes that are basically qualitative and attitudinal and behavioral, and that come
Right.
from psychographics, and they come from just this, interviewing people, doing a thing and asking them questions about how they do something. Some of that's retrospective, and some of it's, it can be in the form of a usability type situation where you're having them do walkthroughs or whatever. But then there's buyer personas, like you said, which are the marketing, branding, statistical ones that come from surveys. And those are the ones you mostly see. And you're right, those are terrible for product design, but so many people do them. And
Yeah.
then you have the proto personas. Those are the ones that people make up. They do them based on tacit knowledge and assumptions really quick. They do them based on 360 empathy maps, says, thinks, feels, does, pains, canes, all that kind of stuff. But I think there's something that's kind of interesting is there's a fourth one that gets overlooked that's really important. And that's like the ideal customer profile, the ICP, that has the firmographic stuff. And that one's great, especially in your business, in banking, and in healthcare. And the reason is your brokers, your salespeople, your, people who are pitching businesses, B2B, that sort of thing, and looking for companies to do business with, you need to have firmographics. You need to know about the business and what the scale of the business is. What would you call it? Trendscaping analysis, or and when you build a profile of the ideal business to go after, that is a form of persona. It's a
Yeah.
profile. It's the business is a persona. And the thing is we just talked about 4 or 5 different types of personas and archetypes. And most people talk about one, and they get on LinkedIn and they're like, personas suck. And I'm like, okay, what's your understanding of them? Well, they all got fake people, and Betty the buyer, and Melissa the marketing gal, and they're all demographic based and fake. And I'm just like, well, it sounds like you don't know anything about personas.
Or of that one type of
Or
persona.
you understand one and you're applying it to all
Yeah.
things, and now you're mad about it and bad mouthing a very useful and meaningful artifact.
For some, yeah. I think the biggest struggle I have had when building personas or working with them is people on my team, non-UX folks, want to know, well, what percent of the population is this persona?
They want to dig into quantitative. They go
Yes.
right to,
Yes.
because
And I'm like,
people who have math backgrounds and their MBAs, or people who, they always go to the quant. They're just like, I want to know how many millions of people did it. And I love the quote from, I don't remember if it was Nielsen or Norman or who did it, but one of them said, how many times do you need to trip over the corner of a rug before you fix it? Do you need to do that 1,000 times, or do you need to do it twice or
exactly.
once?
I use that all the time because it's so
It's
true,
true. It's
right?
true. That's why we only talk to 5 to 10 people, 5 to 7 people. You don't need to talk to more than that if it's in a specific use case scenario, like you mentioned.
Yeah, I think, and talking about that, what percent of the population is this persona? Well, I'm
Who
3 of
cares?
these at different times, at different viewpoints. Like I might be a little bit more to this persona when I'm angry or I need this, but I might be a little more of that persona later in the day when I'm this. That's why they're archetypes and we don't plot them to
Right.
segments, because that's what I think personas should focus on, is like a mindset at the moment. And that's why I like
You
focusing
nailed
on a
it.
scenario, is because I'm trying to do this thing right now. Yeah, I might drive a pink car and have 6 poodles, not true, but that's that's just a blanket thing about me. But right now, I'm trying to eat this snack, and this
Yeah,
is why this matters.
I'm
The
trying to
poodle's
check
in my
out in your
car.
broken website. I'm trying to onboard. It doesn't really matter anything other than what it is that they're going through in your particular system or the service that you're providing. But
Yeah,
it's funny that you mentioned that because of all those things that I was mentioning, all those different, like personality indicators and different types of things, is the thing that people hate the most about Myers-Briggs. And I'm not a Myers-Briggs apologist, but the thing that they always say that you always hear, they say, oh, but your personality could change. And my first reaction to that is just what you said. I don't care. I don't care who they were 20 years ago or who they're going to be 10 years from now. I care what they're doing right now in my system. Say they're an introvert and that's how they test. And I can tell that they're not speaking up in a class or in an e-learning situation. Well, that's probably why.
I think a lot of those personality tests also lead into confirmation bias. It's like the zodiac sign. Oh,
I've heard
you're a
that too.
Capricorn and you're these things. And I'm like, yeah, I guess I'm probably 8 of the 12 listed here. But do you ever go over and look at Virgo to see what that list looks like and see, oh, I'm actually more of those? Or I'm persnickety today, but not tomorrow, right?
Right.
So I think a lot of that is people are getting a segment of information to confirm why they're that, but they don't really holistically examine it to be like, I don't know,
Right.
maybe I'm more of this, but you didn't show me that option.
Rising to the description instead of just saying, I don't know if it really applies to me.
I will wrap up with one more question of you today. What does the future of UX, you mentioned CX, EX, lots of X's. What is the future?
I think AI is going to play a large role in everything that we do. And the sooner you can adapt to those things or start engaging them, are they perfect now for things like research and design? No, of course not. Goes without saying. But this is a tectonic shift. This is an important moment. And this is just like the big moments of like iPhone, Web 2.0, the web being invented. This is one of those moments that's going to be a blip, a dot, and there's the stuff that happened before and there's the stuff that happened after, but this moment is a blip. And so the quicker you can shift your mindset to understand that and go move around and use it and make it part of a viable part of your craft and your practice and whatever it is that you're doing, I think you're going to be better off for it. The people that are bad mouthing it and saying it's LLM's lie and blah blah blah, AI and ML, we've been using it for years and years. The thing is, where can it be applied? Where can it be used? And how can you stay on top of that knowledge and be an advocate and also inform it and color it with your experience? Because the thing is crying about how it's going to take millions of jobs and then sitting around and trying to sound like the best Luddite in the room, like, oh my God, it's going to take our job. Nobody wants to hear that. Get busy living and shift gears or shut up. And
Yeah.
that's the future. It's the now. It's not the future. It's where we are right now. And
Yeah.
so the sooner you accept that and engage it, the better off you're going to be and the happier you're probably going to be. Stop resisting. Stop resisting.
Yeah, that's totally fair. What specifically when you say embrace AI? How? What do I need to do? I keep hearing, what about it? How do I get started?
I have a really cool little booklet and a cool article, and I'll post it on your thing. But right now, the to me the most fascinating and interesting things that are happening in AI isn't stealing people's illustration IP or they're teaching a bunch of Philistines how to be writers by stealing content from various places. That's the lamest thing that AI is doing. What AI is doing that's absolutely like magical and fascinating is what it's doing in science and healthcare. And it has a lot of possibilities in healthcare and medical stuff. And so we need to harness it. We need to get on top of it. We need to have some ethics. There needs to be some responsibility around it. It's the Wild West and it's wide open right now. And I think that's dangerous. I'll admit to that all day. It's a water sucker. These giant data centers, they suck tons of water. They require tons of water to keep them cool. That's a bummer. That's not very cool for the environment. So let's talk about that stuff. Let's also talk about what they're doing overseas and with like the Philippines and in India and China, what they're doing with these LLMs and how they're training. They're paying people $5 or $6 a day in these internet cafes to support these LLMs and prop it up. That's bullshit. We need to work on all of those things. But where can it be applied right now to every single large organization? There's no reason to have call centers where people do not speak whatever language it is that you're calling in. If you're primarily in North America and it's English that you speak, then you need to be able to speak to someone who speaks English. If you speak Spanish, if you speak Chinese, whatever, Mandarin, you need to be able to speak to someone who speaks your language. And the quickest way you can do that right now is AI. And so this notion that we have call centers that just speak one or two languages, and yet in the state of Texas, we have hundreds of languages that are spoken, hundreds. And the idea that people can't get help in their native tongue is dumb. It's really silly because that can be implemented right now. The other thing is the biggest source of consternation in most large organizations is their call center help. Staying on hold for 20 minutes, talking to 5 different people, getting transferred from India to China, back to the Philippines, back to America. Because once you finally get to the tier 4 support that you needed in the first place, you're speaking to some lady in North Carolina and you started off in Bangladesh. And that's bullshit. It's not cool. And that's not a racial thing that I'm talking about. I'm talking about a cultural and a service problem. That's a service problem. And when people rail on people for bad service, they're usually talking about that. They're talking about being left on hold. I had to give you my social security number 6 different times. What's the deal? Why don't you know why I'm calling in? This is the 4th time. All of that stuff can be solved by AI. Bad websites, bad product experiences. You can just have these giant libraries, right? And the AI can crawl that stuff as long as it's indexed properly and can report back. Hi, Jen. You wanted to know where a good proctologist is in Dallas? Well, would you like that sent to your email or would you like that sent to your text? You got it on your text. That's where we can start implementing AI safely, responsibly, and it'll be good for the company, profitable for everybody, and millions of jobs.
Yeah. Yeah. I've dealt with some chat bots. I was just doing that 2 days ago and I struggled because you get that, I don't understand your question.
You're talking about menu bots. That would be a entry point in a multimodal situation, would be chat, like online chat, but those
Right.
things suck. And
Yeah.
most of them are based on menu bots or they have a select finite group of answers to call from.
Right.
I'm talking more along the line of like bot assistants or like a bot advocate that can speak to you in whatever your tongue is in a human voice and then go retrieve whatever you want and bring it back to you. That's the next level. And what we're doing right now with natural language processing, it's changing. Prompting is going to be dead really soon here. And you're just going to speak it. You're just going to say, hey, I want this. Now they're going to ask a clarifying question or two, and then they're going to get you your thing, whatever you're requesting. And people who have done content, people who've done UX, people who've done all of this stuff and any kind of mapping, if you're good at mapping, because that's what all these, what conversational design is really about. It's understanding logic. If the customer asks for this, I give them that, or the choice between these 5 things or whatever. So I think that's where we can start. That's jumping in the baby pool, getting your feet wet, but you're not going crazy and diving and doing backflips off the high dive into the deep, dark waters. Robots knocking on our door and shooting us because we're 2 days late on our credit card payments. RoboCop shit.
Let's hope that doesn't happen.
Well, I don't know. Have you seen the bot that looks like C3PO? It's white and black. It looks just like the robot from iRobot with Will Smith, and it's in Tesla. It walks around in the Tesla factory here in Austin. And yeah, it's a crazy. Go Google it.
What's it do?
It's a humanoid. It looks like C3PO. Anything.
What's it there for?
It's an assistant. It goes and gets things for people. It moves things around. It pretty soon here it'll be cussing you out in a room and arguing with the marketing person. You know what I mean?
See, that's taking our job right there.
Yeah.
Oh,
Bad robot. You make a really terrible latte. I'm gonna turn you off.
Oh, well, Thomas, this has been great. Thank you so much. I know we're going to have to do another one of these. I didn't even scratch the surface on the things that we could talk about, but thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed it.
Right. I enjoyed it too. And good luck with this. I hope your podcast blows up. You're a cool person.
Thank you. Thank you so much. All right. Well, I'll let you go and we will connect again really soon.
Bye now.
All right. Bye. Thank you. Check out all my interviews with industry leaders on BlatzChatz.